Right. We've done this before. Yeah. Sean,
Marco,
what are you doing here? And where is here?
we are in London, Infosecurity Europe.
I can tell from the weather.
That's right. I think it's so windy and rainy that it's coming through the window.
I love it. No. Maybe it's because I live in Los Angeles, so for me, a rainy day is a good day. You know, it's the difference of
perspective. It's not 70 and sunny.
Or 100.
Or 100, yeah.
Let's not go there.
All right.
Let's stay in London at Infosecurity Europe and having great conversation. And I want to thank Will for finding the time to squeeze in a conversation.
You're a busy guy this week.
No, it's a pleasure. Anyway. Thanks very much for the invite. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have a speaking spot here, which is really good. Well, you're on a panel.
Yeah, on a panel.
So,
yeah.
So we'll get a little bit about that, but before we get into the topic, your role, your interest in cybersecurity, obviously those two are connected.
Yeah.
So give us a little background on who William Lyne is.
Yeah, so currently the head of cyber intelligence at the UK's National Crime Agency, the NCA. So we're kind of a little bit like federal law enforcement in the UK, but we're specifically focused on serious organised crime. And the unit that I'm a part of is the National Cybercrime Unit. So we have responsibility for cybercrime, but specifically really focused on the criminal side as opposed to state threats or APT threats. So we're just focused on cybercrime. So big focus for us on ransomware, as you can imagine. I've worked in and around cyber now for kind of over 10 years actually. So I've run teams in the UK doing cyber investigations, and I was the NCA's liaison to FBI Cyber Division over in the US from 2016 to about 2020, and then came back and have worked in a couple of intelligence roles within the NCA, specifically focused on cyber since then. So kind of probably over 10 years specifically focused on cyber.
Which was, this industry is a long time.
Yeah, it is. It is a long time. Yeah. I just find it fascinating. I think it's such an interesting threat area to be involved in.
Can I ask this? The role of technology in, I'll just simplify it, both sides of the crime coin, if you will, enabling criminals and making it easier, potentially less easy for investigators. I'm thinking things like Signal and other encrypted communication channels where a lot of stuff goes underground and it's maybe harder to find and dig up the source and the activities and all that stuff. So kind of the role of both sides.
Yeah, I mean, technology is an increasing part of everyday life, and I think in many ways lots of crime is now enabled or supported by technology. So cybercrime specifically, I like to think about it as existing and a product of a big cybercrime ecosystem where you have threat actors accessing tools and capabilities within that ecosystem. So yeah, it does change the nature of the threat, and it absolutely does mean that in law enforcement we have to evolve our response and change what we do to deliver outcomes against a threat in response to that. So, but in many ways the kind of like core facets of investigation and delivering outcomes, in many ways are common, whether you're very focused on technology-enabled crime or kind of like more traditional serious crime, drug trafficking and such like that we've done for a much longer period of time.
Is there a lot of overlap between the physical and the cyber?
Yeah, I mean, I think increasingly in the cyberspace we see kind of like everything operating within a spectrum, on a spectrum. So it used to be the case that we had quite clear stovepipes of what might be cyber-dependent crime. So offending that you could only commit with a computer, it's like ransomware is a really obvious one, or cyber-enabled crime where there are crimes you can commit without a computer, but technology enables you to scale them up and all that type of stuff. Like fraud is a big one. Lots of fraud is conducted online. I think there used to be some clear kind of like daylight between those two things, and I think increasingly we're seeing everything kind of like operating in a little bit more. It's all a little bit more of a melting pot, isn't it? I think everything is placed on a bit of a spectrum as opposed to having these clear delineated threats. So yeah, well, we do see significant kind of overlaps in threats in crime.
So my vision when I try to explain to people like the hybrid world that we live in, right? There's a digital, like it's another dimension. Well, in reality is part of who we are right now. So I always think about like when Apple and Microsoft, they brought the dashboard and the computer, they didn't just create new objects, they were bringing the desktop and the file folder and everything that we use in normal daily life, and we put it in the digital world. And as we can do that to work, we took ransomware, which existed before the digital world, and it became, ransom, it became ransomware. So the overlap, what I'm saying, is inevitable, but the scale of it.
Yeah, extortion has been around for a really long time, right?
In the human.
Ransomware is that mashed together of ransom and malware. Yeah. And I think sometimes when I reflect back and look back in the late 2010s, for example, and at that point in time, we were really focused on banking malware. Banking malware was kind of like the big threat of the day. But all of the elements that you needed for ransomware to become a really significant issue for us were all there. You had kind of like commodity ransomware variants. You had people being able to utilize modern encryption techniques. You had access to all of these victims. And it just took some threat actors to kind of like innovate and put those things together. And it meant that ransomware kind of went from a niche cybercrime problem, probably in the late 2010s, to a really significant national security issue for us in the UK and across the West in a really short period of time. And I think that's why now in the NCA we're quite invested and we really focus on that cybercrime ecosystem, because we think that understanding that, we think that lots of cybercrime threats are kind of like manifestations or products of that ecosystem. So hopefully we'll ensure ourselves against that in the future, but let's see.
And the 3.0, I know it's part of the panel you're having, Ransomware 3.0. What would define the 3.0 evolution?
I don't know. I'm not sure if I know what Ransomware 3.0 is. I think it's just a representation, isn't it? That it's a constantly evolving threat, right. And it's evolving and it's adapting and it's innovating all the time. I think that there's two kind of like broadly connected trends that this ransomware ecosystem drives. It lowers the barrier of entry to get into cybercrime. Right. It's easier than it's ever been to access tools and capabilities, and it proliferates those tools and capabilities within that ecosystem, and that delivers innovation. The threats changing all the time. I think, lots of that. I think that's what we mean when we're saying Ransomware 3.0.
And so many questions. I'll ask this one first. It seems that we look at like hospitals being compromised and held for ransom, and patients not being treated as fast or effectively as possible. It's a big impact at a big scale. Yet I don't think we've found a way to kind of lessen the threat. It seems like we're still responding to an incident and not really finding a way to block the threat from it. I don't know if it's a technology, a cultural thing, or a legal thing, or I don't know. What's your perspective on how well we're dealing with it before it's an issue versus just investigating and hopefully cracking down on it?
Yeah, I think, as we spoke about, ransomware kind of came about quite quickly, didn't it? I think it really kind of burst into the public consciousness on the back of some really significant ransomware incidents in around 2021 period, kind of like still in COVID times a little bit. And I think it has meant that it does pose quite a unique challenge to law enforcement in many ways, but I think that we actually have pivoted lots of our response and lots of our tactics and the way that we are responding. I think we are less reactive than we were, reacting to this online ecosystem that innovates and changes and evolves really quickly, particularly now where you see groups kind of disappear and rebrand or reestablish really quickly. And there's lots of groups. I think there's probably more ransomware groups operating now than there's probably ever been. So tracking it from like a malware variant perspective is really challenging because you're going to be reactive and looking at what that's doing. And so we proactively instead look at that online cybercrime ecosystem, those things that enable and support the cybercrime business model in a way to get in front of the threat and ultimately be more impactful to protect people and our communities.
Right. So, you go.
Yeah, and I want to bring something that I bring out quite a bit since the day that it came out, which was with Mikko Hipponen. And we were talking about ransomware. I said it's more randomware. Like, it's not really targeted. You just put it out there, and something is going to stick. And sometimes it's the individual, sometimes it's a small business, sometimes it's the big business. Do you treat as a crime investigation this differently, or you actually again try to get to the root of avoiding to happen? But what can we do for the people that are affected by it?
Yeah, so I think improving the victim experience is really important, and of course we take a victim-centric approach to lots of our investigations. But you're totally right. As in, ransomware is by and large opportunistic, and lots of the opportunities that these threat actors are exploiting are, relatively easy to mitigate against if you do the basics of cybersecurity really well. It's really easy to say do the basics well and really difficult to implement doing that. So, there's some great advice and support available to people out there to kind of build their resilience. But yeah, we take that victim-centric approach. We want to understand what victimization looks like and understand what targeting looks like from a UK perspective. So we'd encourage people to engage with law enforcement when you are unfortunate enough to be a victim. And part of that is because you might not necessarily know what we're doing from a law enforcement perspective at any one point in time. So if you look at Kronos, for example, we had access to lots of the Lockbit infrastructure at a point in time. It was only those victims that we were aware of that we were potentially able to help before we publicly came out and kind of like launched and avowed that operation. So that's just one of the benefits of kind of like that engagement with law enforcement. Help us understand the threat, and in turn we may be able to help you.
So the other question that's kind of burning in my mind, and I don't know how much you can share, but what do you see coming?
Yeah.
I mean, I can go to like deep fakes and things like that. I don't know. Is the agency kind of researching and preparing for what might be coming so that you can, again, kind of get ahead of what's happening?
Yeah, so we put a lot of time and effort into kind of like understanding the threat and understanding the innovations and how the threat's evolving, because that informs what we want to deliver at any one point in time. So I think we're going to continue to see that lowering of the barrier of entry and the proliferation of tools and capabilities. So that has some implications for things like ransomware and what the threat profile of ransomware groups looks like and perhaps how they behave and operate. I think secondly, kind of AI. I guess we can't go through a cybersecurity interview without talking about AI, right?
I was waiting.
I kind of tried to go around it with deep fakes, but
yeah, I would say that cyber criminals tend to operate on kind of like an MVP type basis. So they'll only change what they're doing. They'll only change what works if there's an opportunity to make way more money, or the way that they'd be making money is kind of like it is not working as well as it did in the past. So they're probably slower adopters of some technology like AI than perhaps other kind of tech-enabled, tech-dependent people are. But yeah, AI is being utilised by threat actors to kind of like make some different steps of that cybercrime business model more efficient or perhaps a little bit more effective. There's some really obvious ways you can do that. Improving phishing emails. But I think in time you could see the kind of like the integration of AI capability, the commoditization of AI into kind of like as a service offering within that ecosystem, and that will have implications for us from a perspective. But yeah, something that we are tracking and aware of at the moment.
And I think that one last question, maybe I know you have to go, but maybe you have another last question too.
I know. We'll be sensitive.
Okay, mine is actually quick. It's about I think it's quick. How the mentality of the cyber criminal may have changed with so much more access to technology. Because I feel like at the beginning it was more of a social engineer based. Now even the social engineer capped on AI and may use more technology, but is there other things that you guys are noticing in the way that they operate that is different from what it used to be?
I think from a threat actor perspective, we've seen ransomware as predominantly a Russian-speaking threat. It's dominated by Russian-speaking threat actors. and it used to be a relatively closed shop. Access to that ecosystem was closely guarded. You needed to be potentially a native Russian speaker or near native Russian speaker. You needed to have kind of like a history and a reputation within the ecosystem on cybercrime forums or from being involved in criminal activity in the past. But I think lots of that has kind of melted away now. It's very accessible to different threat actors. And yeah, that changes the nature of the threat, that changes the profile of the threat actors, and it changes the kind of like number of individuals that we see involved. And there's opportunity for us in kind of targeting the ecosystem and understanding that, but also opportunity for the threat actors to kind of like think of new ways to generate money.
Maybe one more quick one. Intelligence sharing. Public, private, researchers, universities, things your group are doing to kind of help promote that, perhaps?
Yeah, so I think in law enforcement, we absolutely recognise what an important role, particularly the private sector, have to play in both understanding and then partnering tactically with us to deliver a response to the threat. So, culturally, I think we've shifted and come a really long way to absolutely recognising that and embracing that. You saw private sector partners who were named as being involved in the Kronos, the Lockbit activity last year, and us in the NCA. We're really lucky to have a set of brilliant both national and international partners from a law enforcement and the private sector perspective, and also within academia, as you mentioned it, that help us on those two facets, kind of like understand the threat, understand how it's changing, understand keep up with it, whilst also collaborating to deliver the most impactful response that we possibly can as a community, because in many ways we all want the kind of same thing, right?
Yeah.
I hope so.
So
Ideally.
I think we've come a long way as law enforcement.
Yeah.
But of course, there's always more that we can do in both the public and the private sectors.
Yeah.
Very
Well,
good.
we really appreciate you finding
Yes.
the time. I know you have a lot of other meetings and panels to do, so
And crime to fight.
yeah, absolutely. In between, after that, there's a special 3 days, which is important for the community to come together, and then of course back to work. Although I'm sure it doesn't stop. You get somebody there working. For everybody listening, we're still at Infosecurity Europe in London. We'll come back with many more conversations in the next few days, so stay with us, subscribe, and share. If you like what you hear, let everybody know about it.
Yep.
That's it.
ITSPmagazine.com / Infosec25, all the coverage. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.